नमस्कार। स्वागत है आप
नमस्ते।
सभी का आज के इस अवसर पे। मैं निधि कुमार आप सभी का स्वागत करती हूँ। On the occasion of the 125th birth anniversary year of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, Moirang Divas, we salute the visionary leader Subhash Chandra Bose for his grit, valor, determination in giving us a free India. जी हाँ, आज बात उस महानायक की, आज बात प्रेरणा की, इच्छा शक्ति की, निर्भीक, निडर, मातृभूमि के प्रेमी, आजादी के मतवाले, इन सभी विशेषणों से नेताजी का नाम लिया जाता है। मैं आज के समारोह के सभी गणमान्य व्यक्तियों का बहुत आदर पूर्वक मंच पे आमंत्रण करती हूँ। I welcome as our chief guest today, Shri Ajit Doval, National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister. He will be joining us in a virtual mode. Our keynote speaker, Shri Krishnamurthy Venkata Subramanian, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, and our special guest, Srimati Kiran Chopra, Chairperson of the Varish Nagrik Kesri Club and Director of the Punjab Kesri Group of Publications. I would like to invite on the stage Brigadier R.S. Chikara, Chairman of the INA Trust, Dr. J.S. Rajput, Vice Chairman of the INA Trust, Mr. Dilip Shenoy, Secretary General of FICCI. Thank you so much, sir. And we would like to specially welcome today amidst us Anita Bose Paul. She's a well-known German economist and also the daughter of the famous legendary nationalist leader Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. We are so grateful, ma'am, and delighted to have you here with us in a virtual mode. We'd also like to welcome amidst us in a virtual mode Mr. T.V. Mohandas Pai, Padma Shri awardee, current chairman of the Manipal Global Education. And I'd like to thank your group, Mitro, for live streaming this event today. May you go from strength to strength, sir. I would also like to welcome in a virtual mode Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Indian politician and entrepreneur, Member of Parliament in the Rajya Sabha. It is my privilege to extend a very warm welcome to all of you on this 125th birth anniversary year of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. I would also like to welcome our esteemed members of the INA Trust, Professor Kapil Kumar, and all of you who've joined us, Mrs. Kavita Subramanian and Master Rishabh. Thank you for coming today. I request Brigadier R.S. Chikara to present the Netaji cap to our esteemed dignitaries on the dais, as is the tradition of the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Trust. Sir, can we have a round of applause, please? I know it's pandemic and we haven't called any audience, but thank you, sir. I would now request our dignitaries to come on the dais for the lighting of the lamp ceremony near the Bharat Mata statue on my right. हम ये प्रार्थना करते हैं कि हम अज्ञान से ज्ञान की ओर बढ़ें। दीप हमारी सभ्यता और संस्कृति की अलौकिकता का प्रतीक है। तम सो मार्ग ज्योतिर्गमय। O light of exceptional glory, enlighten the darkness of our minds, for dark is the path and thou holdest the light. Ma'am, if you could also join us in this, we'd be more than grateful. Please. Thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you for joining us today. A special word of thanks to our friends from the media here, DD News, to Mitro, to Punjab Kesari. I would now like to welcome Brigadier R.S. Chikara, Chairman of INA Trust, to please come for the welcome address, sir.
Sri Ajit Doval ji, my friend, let's hope you join soon. Sri K.V. Subramanian ji, Srimati Kiran Chopra ji, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a memorable day in the history of our nation. On this day, Colonel Shaukat Ali marked the liberation of a portion of Manipur state. At that time, it used to be Assam state. In the corner of India, a place not very far from the borders of Burma, not very far from the present-day capital of Manipur, that is Impala. So today, I am privileged to welcome you all. Ajit Doval, our National Security Advisor, known as a great nationalist. I am also privileged to welcome Sri Subramanian and Mrs. Kiran Chopra. As you are aware, the trust takes up different themes during our presentations and lectures. Besides, of course, recalling the life and times of Netaji Subhash and his contribution to India's freedom. So today, the lecture by Shri K.V. Subramaniam is on the theme, need to plan the development of India's economy in accordance with India's civilizational wisdom as amplified in the Arthashastra. Unfortunately, for much of the time, much too long, the complete economic, financial, and trade issues have been overshadowed by the Western thought and philosophy, which in fact does not quite suit the Indian genius. A fresh look is in order. Before we proceed with the business of the day, I take this opportunity to briefly recall the times and circumstances which brought this day about, Moirang Day. At that time, India was an enslaved nation. We were being ruled for the last 200 years by the British, and before that, for 1,000 years, the plunderers, invaders from our north and northwest used to be visiting us, plundering India and then going away, and ultimately resulting in the Mughal Empire. FICCI has been our partner for a long time, ever since we started having these programs for the trust. And just as Mr. Doval represents the physical might or the armed might of the country, Mr. Chenoy represents the economic might of the country, the trade and business environment. The Krishnamurti also represents in a big way the economic might and the economic future of India. Kiran Chopra ji represents the power of the Indian people, their state of awareness and awakening. Now, India has been resisting the invaders and later the rulers from Britain for several centuries. Unfortunately, those efforts were sporadic in nature and they were individual in nature. So the results could not be achieved. Then we had, if you remember, right from the time Bahadur Shah Zafar was the leader of the Indian independence movement. We must remember Aurobindo, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Rajpat Rai, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Veer Savarkar, Guru Tegh Bahadur, Guru Gobind Singh. We must also recall Birsa Munda, Rani Godelo, and a huge pantheon of freedom fighters and leaders who fought against our tormentors through the 19th and 20th century. Then came a venture by Raj Bihari Bose. He went to Japan and prepared the ground for raising an INA in the Southeast Asia. This followed by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, Mohan Singh, Gurbakh Singh Dhillon, Shah Nawaz Khan, and Prem Sehgal. All these people made huge sacrifices for the country. Unfortunately, they could not win freedom through their own individual effort or collective effort. But these are the people who have ignited the fire for freedom in our heart and they've kept the flame going. So I request you to please note that these great people did not fight this battle because they were Hindus or Muslims or Christians or Adivasis or for that matter Buddhists. They fought as Indians. In fact, Netaji Subhash had always said that we are all Indians first and all other identities are subordinate there too. Unfortunately, over a large number of years now, almost 7 decades, the evil forces of division or evil forces of human greed have enveloped us, and we are now again passing through a tumultuous time. We need to shed all this and we need to get back to the sole principle, our sole identity as Indians. Who has to do this? Is obviously the young people of India today. Our days gone, we have done whatever we could in a small way, but our people, the younger people, have to come up now and take up this issue of combining or making a really inclusive democratic India. And when I say inclusive, it means really inclusive, not the secular inclusive. This word secular has been misused in a very bad way. So the young people will have to do a lot, and some sacrifices will need to be made. But it's important that we do it while we still have time. Because even today, there are Jetsons and there are Mir Jaffers. There are people, there are forces who will not let you achieve that objective also. There are people who are bent on dividing the people of India for their own selfish greed. Let us not let anybody divide us anymore. That is my message to this audience. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Jai Hind.
अब मैं निवेदन करूंगी मिस्टर दिलीप शनॉय सेक्रेटरी जनरल फिक्की से कि वो आके अपने विचार साझा करें.
Thank you, Nidhi. Shri Ajit Doval, National Security Advisor, Government of India. Shri Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India. Srimati Kiran Chopra, Director, Punjab Kesari. Brigadier R.S. Chitara, Chairman, Netaji Subhash Bose INA Trust. Mr. J.S. Rajput, Vice Chairman, Netaji Subhash INA Trust. Ms. Anita Bose, Mr. P.V. Mohandas Pai, the Benta, and also Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar. You introduced him as a member of Parliament, Nidhi, but he is also a past president of FICCI. So I will recognize him as a past president of FICCI also. A very warm welcome to this celebration of the Orang Divas Festival on the occasion of the 125th birth anniversary year of Shri Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. As Brigadier Chikara mentioned, FICCI has been partnering the Netaji Subhash Bose INA Trust, and it is a privilege for us to continue doing this and host a series of events during this 125th birth anniversary year. Of course, as Brigadier Chikara said, this marks a very important day for the country. Small town in then Assam, now Manipur, that the Indian National Army formed a provisional government of independent India, defeating the British and hosting the tricolors on independent soil. I've been told that the INA building at Morang still stands tall and houses many exhibits from the Second World War. You know, for us as a family, it's very interesting. It's also a very important area because that's where my uncle, who was in the army in those days, he was coming back and he had to get some medical attention. Met my aunt, who was a doctor in the camp there. And despite she being allocated to treat the women there, he insisted that she actually performed the surgery on him, and then they got married, and then rest is history, as they say. He later on then became the commandant at both the military academy and also at the NDA. But that aside, I think India is turning 75 next year. Therefore, you know, we have come a long way. Some challenges are far from over, and that need constant attention. And we're delighted to have with us this afternoon Mr. Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, the Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India. He has actually chosen a very apt topic. I'd also like to welcome his family here in the FICCI headquarters. Thank you very much for joining. Could we learn something about these challenges from the ancient Indian economic concepts? It was written, the Arthashastra was written around 3000 BC. It has some useful insights about economics, and I'm sure we'll hear in his usual way a very well researched and articulated address by the Chief Economic Advisor. Thank you, Mr. Doval. I don't know whether you will join, but we look forward and we hope that you can join, and we look forward to your presence and participation in this. You have always attended these lectures, actually physically. You were here last year, and we had the pleasure of hosting you. We understand that there are challenges now, but we hope that we will hear you. Again, to all of you who have joined online, thank you very much for being here. Your presence is a tremendous source of interaction and inspiration to all of us. What I'm missing today is the number of students who typically used to come for this physically being here. But thank you very much for being with us. Of course, we are extremely grateful to Ms. Anita Bose representing the family here. It's good to have you present virtually, and hopefully during the course of the year, we shall be able to meet physically and leading up to the celebrations of the 125th birth anniversary next January on the 23rd. So again, very warm welcome to all who have joined virtually and also physically. And we look forward to an exciting program ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. आपके प्रोत्साहन के लिए धन्यवाद. And what would we have done without Vicky? Always there for our support. Thank you, Vicky. And a little bit about the Netaji Subhash Trust, since our Secretary General, Shri Sudhir Singh, is not here today to share his views, as he's in Manipur for the Morang Day celebrations. I will share a few lines about the trust as a trustee of this prestigious trust. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was the greatest nationalist of 20th century India. We all know that, don't we? The credit for our independence and a free India is because of his efforts. The aims and objectives of the trust are perpetuating the memory of Netaji Subhash and the INA, enhancing the socio-economic well-being of marginalized sections of our society, and the trust has adopted the following major programs: building a befitting National INA Memorial and a Netaji Subhash Center for Studies in the center of our national capital. And due to the efforts of Brigadier Chikara, this is going to be a reality very soon. Organizing the Netaji Subhash Memorial Lectures and annual event, which we always do. Establishing a chain of Netaji Subhash military schools that will provide education of the highest quality along with moral, cultural, and adventure training. Public awareness and motivational programs. This will entail motivational lectures by empaneled speakers on such occasions as Netaji's birthday, Moirang Divas, INA Raising Day, and the Azad Hind Hukumat Day, etc. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome today the architect of the Economic Survey, the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, Shri K.V. Subramanian. Shri Subramanian has also been a professor at the Indian School of Business. He holds a Master's of Business Administration and a Doctor of Philosophy in the Financial Economics from Booth School of Business, University of Chicago. I'd like to invite you, sir, to please come to the lectern for your address. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Mr. Subramanian, our keynote speaker.
Good evening, everyone. Shri Ajit Doval ji, National Security Advisor, Government of India, Chair, INA Trust, and the Chief Guest of this function. Srimati Anita Bose, Plaintiff, Patron, INA Trust, noted economist and daughter of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Brigadier R.S. Chikara, Chairman, INA Trust. Dilip Chinoy ji, Chairman, FICCI. Rajiv Chandrasekhar ji, former Chairman, FICCI and Member of Parliament. My good friend Mohandas Pai. Srimati Kiran Chopra ji, Director, Punjab Kesri. Esteemed dignitaries on the dais, virtually and physically, and ladies and gentlemen. Let me first acknowledge how privileged I feel to be able to say a few words on this momentous occasion. Not only is this Moirang Divas or Victory Day, we're celebrating the 125th anniversary of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, the 75th year of our independence. Having learned about all this in our history, about our independence movement, about the seminal role that Netaji played in that movement, to stand here to say something, in his respect, in his memory, just fills me with enormous gratitude. And I therefore really thank the organizers for inviting me to and providing me this genuine privilege. As we all know, Moirang Divas is Victory Day, because this was the day when the flag was hoisted by the Azad Hind Fauj. When Manipur was captured, Manipur and half of Nagaland was captured. As Brigadier Shikara quite rightly mentioned, Colonel Shaukat Ali of the Azad Hind Fauj marched into Moirang along with his soldiers and hoisted the national flag on this day. Incidentally, this day also happens to be the Tamil New Year and the New Year Vishu and New Year for in many parts of India. So I would like to take this opportunity to wish everyone a very, very happy New Year. Hope happy and healthy New Year going forward. But this day is so seminal because this is the battle that really helped India win the eventual war against the imperialist forces. Because this was India's first victory against the British imperialist forces. So I think this day is indeed a red letter day in the history of India. After being invited to deliver this lecture, one of the first things that I did was to go and read Netaji's autobiography. An unfinished one, but still incredibly inspiring. And one can only imagine how more inspiring it would have been, if it had been completed. An Indian Pilgrim. And I'm going to quote verbatim from Netaji's autobiography to draw inspiration on the one hand, and on the other hand, to really illuminate how inspired Netaji himself was by India's heritage. Netaji mentions in his autobiography that I was not going to follow the beaten track, come what may. I was going to lead a life conducive to my spiritual well-being and for the uplift of humanity. In practical life, I was going to emulate Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda as far as possible. And in any case, I was not going in for a worldly career. Far lesser mortals, but people like us who actually also have taken the opportunity to not necessarily follow the trodden path, these words are real succor and huge inspiration. Netaji then talks about Atmano Moksharthaya Jagadhitaya. For your own salvation and for the service of humanity, that was to be his life's goal. Atmano Mokshartha Jagadhitaya. Atma, for yourself, Atmano Mokshartha, that for his own upliftment, but Jagadhitaya, for the benefit of humanity, for the benefit of the whole world. I think just reading that biography and looking for himself, is something that uplifts all of us, our spirits. And we would do really well to remember these, in the 75th year of our independence. And indeed, he mentions that the service of humanity included, of course, the service of one's country. For armchair patriots like us, real patriots like Netaji, reading words like these are just genuinely inspiring. Given this revelation to me about how Netaji was inspired by India's heritage, I thought it is best for me to draw upon my own experience and whatever I have learned to talk about India's economic heritage. Having had the privilege to be trained as an economist in the West, I've been able to read Adam Smith and his descendants. Whenever we think about Western economic thought, we think about Adam Smith as the father of modern economics. But crucially, given my upbringing, pretty humble one at that, I got the privilege to learn about India's very, very rich heritage. And possibly being able to read about this heritage in the literature in native language inspired me to also go and dig into some of India's economic, traditional economic thought. The last year's economic survey indeed was focused on theme of wealth creation by drawing on these ideas and combining that with modern economic thought. So I thought it is best to talk about the big ideas that indeed powered India's economy over history, and talk about it that in contemporary context as well. When one talks about India's economic thought, I think it would be befitting to remind ourselves of Professor Frank Knight. Those of us who learn economics, we look at Frank Knight as a very, very seminal contributor, because he was the one who actually wrote about the difference between risk and uncertainty. Not only that, at the University of Chicago, as a professor, he trained 3 Nobel laureates, including none other than Milton Friedman, George Stigler, and James Buchanan. So here's a towering personality who has not only contributed seminal ideas in economics and has actually created others who towered in terms of the ideas that they delivered to humanity. Him talking about the role of Indian economic thought in the history of economic thought. Commenting on Joseph Schumpeter, by the way, another towering personality. There's an article he wrote, a book on the history of economic thought. While reviewing that book, Frank Knight notes, and that's because Angus Maddison wanted to show this. The contribution in more recent times. But the key takeaway that I want you to pay attention to here is that up until 1750 AD, in other words, 3/4 of known economic history. Mark that out. 1750 AD, 3/4 of known economic history. India was the largest contributor to world's GDP at a minimum of 33%. Just to give you perspective on what this means, because history can oftentimes actually just seem like numbers. Just to give that perspective, let's just compare with the United States, which all of us today acknowledge as the economic superpower. The United States has been an economic superpower for half a century, has contributed between 33%, now obviously in the 20s, but at its peak also close to 35-36%, but for half a century. Put that on a time scale together and just reflect on it for a minute. Half a century of dominance, and we all look up to the United States for the ideas that it brings on economics. And here, India was the dominant superpower, contributing at least 33% of world's GDP for 17.5 centuries. That's 35 times as long. I think this one factoid, when we started writing the economic survey last year, this was one factoid that made us dig deeper. There has to be something right that India did in terms of its economic thinking, because such kind of dominance does not happen by sheer accident. Such kind of dominance happens only because of the quality of thinking that is brought to policy. And I think that is what I want to actually focus on going forward. This is the fact that actually leads me to dig deeper and find out what was the key aspects of India's economic thinking. All of us Indians have actually heard about these 4 purusharth: dharma, arth, kama, moksha. If you think about human life, and in particular the role of the economy in this context, these 4 purusharths actually, in this particular slide, we've tried to capture the essence of human life, but especially the role of economy in this. So what you see there is a marriage or a wedding of dharma with artha. Dharma symbolizing hand of ethics, and artha the hand of of wealth, or rupee, the symbol that is being shown. So it's this marriage of the hand of ethics with the hand of of wealth, or artha. That's what leads to the satiation of desires, kama. And as Maslow talked about, and as Indian scriptures talk about, whether it's the Upanishads or the Vedanta or even the Bhagavad Gita, you go and read them, you find that this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that basal needs for them to be satisfied is important before self-actualization, or the word that we Indians use, moksha, liberation, can actually happen. So what I will focus on in the context of these four purushartha is the marriage of the hand of ethics, dharma, with that of artha. So the combination of dharma and arth is what actually really Indian economic thinking at a 50,000, 60,000 feet level really is what it's about. Now let me give you some specifics on this big idea that I've talked about, the marriage of dharma and arth. My native language is Tamil, and I have had the privilege of reading some part of Tirukkural. I will acknowledge I've not been able to read the full parts. In Tirukkural, in fact, actually is split into three parts. There's one part that goes, which is called Porul Pal. Pal in Tamil means milk or essence, and Porul means material. So this part of Tirukkural is about the way to actually, get material prosperity, the essence of material prosperity, Porul Pal. And the beauty, by the way, actually something that I discovered is that every chapter in Tirukkural has exactly 10 verses. So, for instance, if I say the verse 753, you can just mathematically immediately say this is the 76th chapter. Not only that, every shloka is exactly 2 lines, and every shloka has the same number of words as well. And so somebody writing about Tirukkural actually said that Saint Thiruvalluvar essentially took a mustard seed and took the entirety of the 7 oceans and filled it into that mustard seed. That is basically the essence or the wisdom, that much amount of wisdom being captured in just 1,000 odd verses on stuff relating not just to the material world, but also about desires and about spirituality as well. So Saint Thiruvalluvar talks about in verse 753, as I said, therefore the chapter 76, he says, wealth, the lamp unfailing, speeds to every land, dispersing darkness at its Lord's command, which is the Lord wealth. So this is one of the ideas basically recommending and commending wealth, not being looked at wealth as a bane, but as a boon. A boon that really dispels darkness at its Lord's command. And, even more in a way that all of us can relate. Remember, this is actually being, millennia back. Thiruvalluvar says, make money. There is no weapon sharper than it to sever the pride of your foes. As practically relatable today as it could be, that if you want to sever the pride of your foes, make money. That is certainly not being talked about as a bane, wealth as a bane, but as a boon. This is in some sense capturing the way in which artha, wealth, was actually captured or was represented in the Indian thinking. And incidentally, and this is something all of us again can relate with, in our daily life, we write Shubh Labh. We say Shubh Labh. Shubh is salutary, good, and Labh is profit. So make profit by doing good. I don't think we go and write there basically Shubh and Hani. We don't say Shubh and Hani. Why? Because these really deep thinkers thought that only when you make profit can you be able to generate the scale of the economy to be able to continue doing more good. And I think sectors like microfinance today, for instance, are brilliant examples of this Shubh Labh concept. And this is something which is important because, in the past, especially I'm going to talk about the period after independence, there had been a notion that labh is a dirty word, profit is a dirty word. It is important to distinguish between profit and profiteering. there are differences between those two. But shubh labh, profit, by doing good, is something that was commended in the Indian ethos. Now, if you think about it, that is in terms of the objective of wealth as a boon or a bane. But how do we go about creating wealth, and how does wealth creation happen in the economy? And here's where, if we go and read Arthashastra, India's traditional economic thinking actually emphasized enabling markets, empowering private enterprise, and eliminating obstacles to economic activity. So today, the World Bank comes up with the ease of doing business. That is essentially the idea of eliminating obstacles to economic activity. So this, I'm drawing from Spengler's work, published in 1971 by the Duke University Press. Spengler is writing on Kautilya, the author of Arthashastra. And he's quoting from Kautilya. He says, the root of wealth is economic activity, and lack of it brings material distress, which all of us today, and especially industrialists like Dilip, will definitely relate to. All of us economists will certainly relate to as well, that the root of wealth is economic activity, and lack of it brings material distress. And I think the period over the last 1 year has also illustrated in some sense, when there are economic restrictions, that does affect wealth in the economy. Absent fruitful economic activity, both current prosperity and future growth are in danger of destruction. And therefore, Kautilya exhorts the king that you must remove all obstructions to economic activity. As clear as that. Essentially saying, enable ease of doing business in today's language. And, this is again, Olivelle in 2013, a book published by Oxford University Press, talks about how Arthashastra as a treatise on economic policy was deeply influential in India till the 12th century. So the ideas of private enterprise, the ideas of trade and wealth actually were those that permeated, economic policy that was followed by kings up until 12th century, and now relate back to, the economic dominance that I spoke about. It is these ideas that actually led to that, that kind of dominance. And, specifically, if you look at a key contributor to the ancient India's prosperity was internal and external trade, especially via two major highways, which was the Uttarapatha and Dakshinapatha, which is basically the northern road and the southern road. And the ports that India had along its coastline connected India to Egypt, Rome, Greece, Persia, and the Arabs on the west, and with China, Japan, and Southeast Asia to the east. This was being able to trade. So both roads and ports were actually ones that enabled India to trade with both within India and with the world. And it was basically such economic activity that led to India's prosperity. Trade was carried out by large corporatized guilds, which are similar to today's multinationals, and were actually funded by temple banks. So if you think about today's venture capitalists, the equivalent of those were the temple banks, where they actually used to get, the deposits, quote unquote, from devotees, and they would use that to fund economic activity. And the temple, in fact, at that time was a center of economic activity as well, apart from obviously, the traditional social, philosophical, and spiritual, center. Arthashastra in particular, and this is very interesting, which I want to point out in chapter 15 and the second part of the book. So Kautilya specifies the duties of the king's superintendent of commerce. Superintendent of commerce is the equivalent of the commerce, the ministry, saying that mariners and merchants who import foreign merchandise shall be favored with the remission of the trade taxes so that they may derive some profit. Note again here, he's saying some profit, and again, consistent with profit, not profiteering. In other words, commerce and wealth were intrinsic to India's DNA. And I think this is something that we have to recognize, as Brigadier Chikara mentioned, that when we implement policies that are consistent with India's DNA, they're far more likely to be successful than those that are anathema to India's DNA. And now actually, having laid out these ideas that prevailed in India's traditional economic thinking, I want to actually, talk about how for a while after 1750 AD, India moved away from this DNA paid the costs as a result of that. And since 1991 has come back. And in fact, after the, as part of the policies that have been implemented post-COVID, are going back vigorously to India's DNA, which I'll talk about it at the last. So this is something all of us have learned about in our history. The 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, which culminated in the Battle of Plassey, coincides with the start of India's economic decline. If you recall, I said up until 1750 AD, India was the leading, economic superpower, accounting for more than one third of world GDP. And incidentally, imperialism, and the 7 Years' War basically coincides at that point in time. Based on the arguments that I'm laying out, this correlation I attribute to be causation as well. That the moving away from India's DNA is what caused the decline in India's economic fortunes. And stalwarts like Dadabhai Naoroji and R.C. Dutt have highlighted these inimical effects of imperialism. For instance, they talked about how British economic policies actually undermined markets. There's often a narrative that is put out that imperialism basically was laissez-faire and that therefore markets are not good. But actually, in practice, what the British economic policies did was to undermine markets, distorted markets in Britain's favor at the expense of Indian companies and Indian manufacturers, imposed tariffs that favored British exports, and as a result, a lot of our comparative advantage that we had in traditional, trade, we ended up losing over 2 centuries of these kind of policies, supported British firms at the expense of Indian entrepreneurs. And that's what made people like Dadabhai Naoroji actually write about, these economic policies, and an artificial exchange rate that actually tilted the trade surplus in favor of Britain. So these policies were moving away from the DNA, which involved trade, private enterprise, and markets. And I think this is also something I must mention. While these policies were being implemented, when faced with famine, the non-intervention or deciding not to intervene was rationalized based on saying that, intervention would violate principles of free trade and free enterprise, which I think was very rich given the policies that were being implemented on the economic side. Of course, this is something that we know about it today. So it's the undermining of markets and trade and India's comparative advantage on several areas, and not basically markets and trade, which is the narrative that is pushed, that it is the undermining of markets and trade that led to the economic decline, not laissez-faire or markets and trade itself. As it turned out, this we continued this through the first 35-40 years of the socialist era, and former Chief Economic Advisor Virmani has written very nicely about it, that the slow GDP growth that we had in the first 4 decades or so was due to the all-pervasive state control and command that shackled the economy. Centralized planning, which was what we embarked on, was devoid of 2 central tenets, which is of economics, which is incentives and information. Any economist, when he or she is asked to design a policy, the first 2 things that economists think about is incentives and information. When policies are created sitting in Delhi, the information about what is happening in a Warangal or maybe in a Palakkad, that information does not come about. And at the same time, incentives also get affected. And so the centralized planning was devoid of two possibly the most important determinants of economic policy, which is incentives and information. Several stalwarts have written about this. C. Rajagopalachari, Rajaji, as he's fondly called, picked up the dangers of this policy early on, and in fact advocated the model of private enterprise, competition and markets as was pursued by Germany, France and West Germany after the Second World War. Economists like B.R. Shenoy, if you go and read some of the debate about the Planning Commission, the economists like those also dissented and warned about the perils of shackling the Indian economy through the state control and command. Incidentally, this showed up in our trade as well. From 1945, India's share in world trade declined precipitously. And again, consistent with the idea that it was actually trade, economic activity That is what led to prosperity. And once we moved away from that, we ended up, reducing our economic fortunes. So this notion oftentimes, and again, having had the opportunity to read some of the narratives in native languages, sometimes when you read the Western narratives on Indian scriptures, one finds that the notion is created that India's intellect, all the saints and the rishi munis, etc., they focus their intellect on just the other world, which is but that is not true. There's was lot written about the here and now as well, and that's what the traditional economic thinking was about. The truth was that the economic model that we followed was anathema to India's DNA. And now, after, of course, that period of, first imperialism and then the socialistic period, India in 1991 started returning back to its DNA. And what I want to show going forward, a few charts, just, the details of all this are there in the last year's economic survey, but showing how indeed when India started going back to its DNA post 1991, the benefits that we had enjoyed up until 1750-80, that those benefits have started transpiring again. So what I'm showing you here is on the x-axis is the increase in wealth of top 100 entrepreneurs since 1991. And on the y-axis, I'm going to relate it to several stakeholders, employees, suppliers, the government, which is taxpayers, foreign exchange revenues, etc. So the y-axis will change. The x-axis will remain the same, which is increase in the wealth of top 100 entrepreneurs. So first up, if you see here that as the wealth of the entrepreneurs increased, employees' salaries increased as well. So employees benefited from the companies that were created by these entrepreneurs and the salaries that they ended up paying to those. If you look at next, which is the suppliers, these companies procure raw material, procure various capital, and capital components from suppliers. Similarly, an increase in the wealth of entrepreneurs led to greater benefits for suppliers, and so the entire value chain, supply chain, if you will, also benefited from from wealth creation post 1991. Similarly, if you look at the economy itself, foreign exchange revenues increased significantly from increase in economic activity through the top 100 entrepreneurs, their increase in wealth. At the same time, and this is where I'll relate this at the end to the current model, the direct taxes that were paid, and this does not include, by the way, indirect taxes, because data on that is hard to come by, but the direct taxes that are paid by people who become wealthy, that also increases significantly. And it is this taxpayer money that is eventually used for welfare programs, whether that welfare program is a Swachh Bharat Abhiyan or a PM Awas Yojana or the Har Ghar Jal Yojana, all those, it is from the taxes that are that these welfare programs are done. So that's something which is really important to keep in mind. So employees, suppliers, the economy through foreign exchange and the taxes has benefited from wealth created by entrepreneurs. Similarly, if you look at sectors, in the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you sectors that were opened up versus sectors that remained closed. So for instance, here, roads versus railways is contrasted. The billion tons, on the y-axis, what you see is the billion ton kilometers. Look at the slope of the road sector, which is an open sector, vis-a-vis the railways, which is basically shown in purple. The roads is shown in gray, and you see the slope, which is the growth rate of growth being much higher. Similarly, if you go and see the billion passenger kilometers, again, huge increase in the open sector, which is roads, vis-a-vis railways. So again, opening up of the sectors and encouragement of economic activity really created wealth and in the economy. If you look at the banking sector, again, entry of private banks, which is enhanced economic activity, really created wealth as well. Economic activity really increased banking sector presence, and so this is consistent again with enormous economic activity and wealth creation following the opening of sectors. Relate back to what Kautilya talks about, which is government's role has to be to create, remove restrictions for economic activity and thereby enable economic activity, which is what India ended up doing after 1991. lastly, as part, as part of evidence, I want to show you this is benefits from privatization, the benefit of private enterprise. So it's in 2000, the privatization that was done. There are So this shows the evidence for the benefits of privatization, compensation of employees, compensation, total compensation, and on a per capita basis, the taxes paid, the foreign exchange earnings, payments to suppliers, R&D expenses, capital expenditure. Each of these have multiplied, between. So what I'm showing here is whether, in the case of compensation, it's multiplied 2.4 times post privatization, in terms of total amounts. While if you look at it in terms of average amounts, it is about 2.3 times. Similarly, on each of these parameters, privatization has created benefit, again related to private enterprise, creating wealth in the economy. So if you look at one more, this is a recent, example. The government has announced the privatization of Bharat Petroleum. If you look at the stock prices of Bharat Petroleum versus Hindustan Petroleum, which is an apples to apples comparison, what you find is that about 55,000 crores of value has been created. So notice, up until September of 2020, when the privatization was announced, up until that time, both stock prices are moving lock, stock and barrel. You are basically moving in tandem. But after that, Bharat Petroleum stock price increases, and that is increase in national wealth, because the taxpayer as a shareholder is having a stake in the, in example of how increasing private activity really, creates wealth in the economy. So the second part is understand, which is, while artha is really critical, dharma, which is the hand of ethics, is as important. And here again, our traditional economic thinking has been a crucial contributor to this aspect, which is, dharma is important to avoid matsya nyaya, or the law of the jungle. What is the law of the jungle? The big fish eat the small fish. That's the law of the jungle. And we need the marriage of the hand of artha with the hand of dharma to avoid this matsya nyaya, or the law of the jungle. And here Tiruvalluvar, again, actually I'm going to quote, wealth yields righteousness and joy, the wealth created or acquired capably without causing any harm. And I think this part captures, in some, it's an umbrella that captures things like pollution, climate change, even things like, avarice, which is lobe or moh. And if you go and read Adam Smith as well, Adam Smith's ideas too. Adam Smith in his treatise talks about combining moral living and reasonable pursuit of material desires. The important word there is reasonable pursuit of material desires. So, while most people just focus on Adam Smith's, advocacy of markets, but the other aspect, which is the moral aspect, he focused on that as well. And therefore, even in the Western literature, this idea is there about bringing together the hand of dharma with the hand of artha. And this is not consistent with the greed is good phenomenon, as New York Times in the 80s had talked about. And I think the global financial crisis, there's a lot of literature now on that, and the banking crisis in India are illustrative of the importance of the hand of dharma. Just the hand of artha can actually lead to, lead to excesses, and therefore the discipline that is provided by the hand of dharma is really important. Think about this in the following way: a river needs banks to flow well. When the banks are not there, the water goes helter skelter. Similarly, the banks are provided by the hand of dharma so that the economic activity, the artha, can actually flow well. Otherwise, if these banks, which is the hand of dharma, that's broken, then the flow is helter skelter and creates a lot of destruction. A good example of that is what we've seen with willful default in the in the last decade or so. And this is again drawn from the last year's economic survey. The taxpayer, the loss to the taxpayer, is as good as some of the important subsidies that the government provides. Of the same order of food subsidy, the capital expenditure for railways. So in other words, we can think about, if this money had not been lost due to willful default, It could have easily been used in, in doubling the capital expenditure of the railways and thereby actually providing much better travel for the common person. Similarly, you could, do thought experiments that this money could have been used for the health, education, and social protection, and welfare programs. So this is why the hand of dharma is as important as well, when we think about the economic vision for India. Which brings me, to the last part of my talk about how over the last few months and especially the last year, the policies that the Indian government has implemented have tried to bring this vision into play. Think about India's current economic vision as actually reflecting these ideas, but think about it as a triangle which has three vertices to it. One, which is the focus on growth, because growth, as we have seen, provides the taxpayers' money, the taxes that actually can be used for efficient welfare. Over the last 7 years, the government has shown the ability to be able to do efficient welfare. So I think this focus on growth, exclusive focus on growth, together with efficient welfare, is important not only to reduce inequality, but also to create demand in the economy. The second important vertex is something that I've already spoken about, which is ethical wealth creation, enabling of private sector, the enterprise, enabling of private enterprise. And the Honorable Prime Minister has spoken about this in the floor of Parliament in the budget session. And finally, a virtuous cycle that starts from private investment. Which leads to growth, and that growth puts money in the hands of people. When people spend that money, that's when the increase in aggregate demand increases investment further, and that's how this virtuous cycle proceeds. In the 2018-19 survey, we had spent time on showing this by looking at all countries that grew at least 5% plus for at least a decade over the last 1 century. What we found is that each of those countries grew by growing its private investment and following this virtuous cycle. So this is the important, element of the vision that needs to be followed by drawing not only on a very rich heritage that we have as Indians in terms of our economic thinking, but at the same time also some of the granular ideas that modern economics has brought in terms of the benefits that comes from capital expenditure driven growth. So let me conclude on this very important day, Victory Day, Moirang Divas. I must once again acknowledge that I'm indeed privileged to be inspired by Netaji's respect for India's heritage, and in that path, by being inspired by that, I have made a humble attempt to try and recognize India's economic DNA, India's heritage in terms on the economics, and the main idea is that India's economic vision historically, which made India the dominant economic power, was one that was obtained by marrying dharma with artha, or the hand of ethics married with the hand of wealth, which leads to satiation of material desires and eventually to liberation. Thank you very much for your patient listening. I'm indeed once again very, very privileged to be able to share these thoughts. Thank you. Sure.
Is there anything in the chat box, Chetan?
It's such an excellent lecture. There is nothing that we have not been able to follow. And it has touched us. Sitting here, I work in the field of education, and therefore a few ideas came to my mind. Whenever we speak to our teachers and others, we refer to a small shloka. Vidya dadati vinayam. The more you acquire knowledge, you become humbler. Vinyadyati patatam. Acquisition of knowledge does not make you eligible unless and it is harmonized with Vinayashilta. Vidya dadati vinayam, vinyadyat patatam, patratat dhanam apnot. Once you are eligible, prepared with Vinay, you must earn. So many people, when I talk to them, this Shubh Labh, they would interpret everything should be Shubh and earn and Labh aana chahiye. This particular interpretation is not known to many people. It must be only by the righteous means. So in this slok, it says the same thing. Patratat dhanam apnoti, dhanat dharmam tatas. You can't be happy only if you have accumulated wealth. There is something in between dhan and sukh. It is dharma, it is righteous conduct. And that is what we people try to bring in education. New education policy emphasizes very particularly on this, that education must be rooted to culture, committed to progress. When I was listening to the whole lecture, and this I had heard in 1996 in Geneva, when a UNESCO report learning the treasure within was being released, the chairman said this is. He said, this is a global picture, but education in every country must be rooted to culture, committed to progress. If that happens, there would be much bigger appreciation amongst the masses for the aspect that Mr. Subramaniam has pointed out to us. I'm really delighted and grateful for this presentation, as all of us are. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for that absolutely. Sorry.
Thank you very much. I would respond on the overall policy. I think it's important to value expertise, especially on the research side. Rajput Saab talked about the new education policy, which indeed tries to value expertise. And inputs like yours will be ones that we will keep in mind in trying to frame the implementation of the policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that absolutely insightful, inspiring, and brilliant lecture, as always. You spoke about the power of Indian economy. हम उम्मीद करते हैं कि भारत का आने वाला कल महफूज हो और रोशन हो. Such a pleasure to hear you speak, sir. And what gave me most happiness in this year's budget allocation was the health sector. Many thanks once again. अब मैं निवेदन करती हूँ श्रीमती किरण चोपड़ा जी से कि वो नेताजी और आईएनए ट्रस्ट के बारे में हमसे अपने विचार साझा करें. Mrs. Kiran Chopra is the founder and chairperson of Varisht Nagrik Kesari Club, an entrepreneur, educationist, and a humanist to the core. She is the main spirit and strength behind this organization. She's also a very famous author. Namaste, Kiran ji. We welcome you.
नमस्कार नमस्कार नमस्कार, जय भारत, जय हिंद। अभी आप सबको मैंने बहुत अच्छे से सुना। चीफ गेस्ट श्री अजीत डोभाल जी, जो अभी शायद नहीं बोले हैं, चेयरमैन आईएनए ट्रस्ट ब्रिगेडियर चिकारा जी, चेयरमैन फिक्की दलीप चिनॉय जी, और श्री कृष्णामूर्ति जी, और फिक्की के एक्स चेयरमैन और अनीता बोस, नेताजी की बेटी। आई फील रियली प्राउड कि मैं इस डिस्कशन और इस फंक्शन का एक पार्ट बनी हूँ, कि क्योंकि इतना अच्छा सब बोल रहे थे, इतना अच्छा सुनने को मिल रहा था, बहुत अच्छा लगा। मुझे आपको बताते हुए अच्छा लगेगा कि मेरा मायका भी फ्रीडम फाइटर फैमिली से है और ससुराल भी फ्रीडम फाइटर फैमिली से है, जिन्होंने देश के आजादी के लिए अपने प्राण न्यौछावर किए। और मेरे ग्रेट ग्रैंडफादर इन लॉ लाला जगत नारायण जी और फादर इन लॉ अमर श्री रमेश चंद्र जी, जिन्होंने आजादी की लड़ाई लड़ी देश को आजाद कराने के लिए, और फिर उसके बाद देश की एकता और अखंडता को कायम रखने के लिए अपने प्राण त्याग दिए। आज जब मैं ये सारी डिस्कशन सुन रही थी और मुझे अपना बचपन याद आ रहा था। जब मैं छोटी थी तो हमेशा फैंसी ड्रेस कंपटीशन में हिस्सा लेती थी, और आप मानोगे मैं हमेशा नेताजी सुभाष चंद्र बोस बनती थी, क्योंकि छोटी सी गोल मटोल होती थी तो मेरा उनसे चेहरा मैच करते थे, और मुझे बहुत अच्छी तरह से वर्डिंग याद थी। तुम मुझे खून दो मैं तुम्हें आजादी दूंगा, तुम मुझे खून दो मैं तुम्हें आजादी दूंगा। उस समय शायद बचपन में मुझे इसके मायने इतने नहीं मालूम, पर इतनी बार रोल किया, इतनी बार पार्टिसिपेट किया कि मेरे अंदर, मेरे जहन में ये एक आवाज, एक जनून हो गया कि तुम मुझे खून दो मैं आजादी दूं। जैसे जैसे मैं बड़ी होती गई तो मुझे समझ आने लगी कि ये किसने शब्द बोले थे, क्यों बोले थे। क्योंकि हम महात्मा गांधी जी, भगत सिंह जी और बहुत से जो आजादी के मतवाले हैं, आजादी के लिए जिन्होंने अपने प्राण न्यौछावर किए, शहीद हुए, और उनके लिए हम बहुत कुछ सुनते हैं। नेताजी सुभाष चंद्र बोस भी एक ऐसे आजादी के मतवाले थे जो आजादी के लिए लड़े, जिनको 125 साल हो गए हैं। उनकी विमान दुर्घटना को अभी भी लोग विश्वास नहीं कर पाते कि वो हमारे बीच नहीं है। क्या अनूठी बात है, क्या अजीब सी बात है कि एक व्यक्ति की उम्र 80, 90, 100 साल होती है, पर अभी भी लोग विश्वास नहीं कर पाते कि नेताजी हमारे बीच नहीं है। अभी भी उनको लगता है कि नेताजी कहीं से आ जाएंगे, क्योंकि वो उनके हीरो हैं। वो ऐसे हीरो हैं जिन्होंने आजाद हिंद फौज बनाई और नारा दिया, तुम मुझे खून दो मैं तुम्हें आजादी दूंगा। वो एक हिंदू माइंडेड पर धर्मनिरपेक्ष व्यक्ति थे, जिन्होंने ICS परीक्षा पास करने के बाद भी अपने आजादी की लड़ाई के जुनून को नहीं छोड़ा। इतना एजुकेशन के बाद भी उन्होंने सोचा कि देश को आजादी ना मिली तो जीना व्यर्थ नहीं है, और उन्होंने वो एक ऐसी फौज बनाना चाहते थे जिसमें सभी धर्मों के लोग हों, सभी जातियों के लोग हों, और उनमें क्योंकि अंग्रेजों ने हिंदुओं को, अपने भारतीयों को बांट रखा था, कुछ रेजिमेंट के नाम दिए हुए थे, तो उन्होंने विदेश में जाके जो फौज बनाई उसके पीछे उनके यही मायने थे कि एक तो भारतीय उस फौज के थे, और एक जो भारतीय कैदी थे उस फौज का हिस्सा थे। जो मैंने जो पढ़ा और जो मैंने समझा, क्योंकि हम इस हिस्ट्री से काफी दूर हैं, और जो पढ़ते हैं, जो समझते हैं, जो सुनते हैं अपने पूर्वजों से, वही समझते हैं। तो उन्होंने एक आजाद हिंद फौज बनाई और उन्होंने देश के लिए लड़ाई, आजादी की लड़ाई ऐसे शुरू की, जारी रखी। मैं समझती हूँ कि हम सोचते हैं कि अहिंसा से हमें आजादी मिली, परंतु असली मायने में बहुत से लोग ऐसे हैं जिन्होंने देश की आजादी के लिए अपनी जान न्यौछावर की, देश की आजादी के लिए लड़ाई लड़ी, कुछ के तो हमें नाम भी नहीं मालूम, कुछ के तो हमें नाम ही नहीं मालूम, और कुछ कुछ लोगों का त्याग भी हमारे सामने नहीं आता, क्योंकि मोस्टली लीडर्स के नाम आते हैं, फौज जो लड़ती है उनके नाम नहीं आते। तो मेरा मानना है, मेरा दिल करता है कि एक एक फौजी को, एक एक फ्रीडम फाइटर को याद किया जाना चाहिए। उनके जो काम है, उनका बलिदान है, उनका त्याग है, आने वाली पीढ़ियों के सामने रखना चाहिए, और ऐसे फंक्शन ऑर्गेनाइज करने चाहिए जिससे लोगों को, आने वाली पीढ़ियों को पता चले कि उनके देश जो आज वो सांस ले रहे हैं, वो किनकी कुर्बानी के कारण ले रहे हैं, किनके त्याग के कारण ले रहे हैं। तुम्हें आजादी दूंगी क्या है। तो ये चीजें जो है, ये जो सेमिनार्स है, आपका आज का सेमिनार बहुत अच्छा है, आपका फंक्शन बहुत अच्छा है, कृष्णमूर्ति जी का बहुत जीनियस भाषण है जो मैंने सुना, और बहुत समझने वाली बात थी। और मैं सोचती हूँ कुछ सरल बातें भी आम आने वाली पीढ़ियों के लिए करनी चाहिए, ताकि वो अट्रैक्ट हो, उसको समझें, और उनमें भी एक जुनून हो, क्योंकि जो नेता अपनी आजाद हिंद फौज बनाई थी, वो हमेशा उनको मोटिवेट करते थे। जो मैंने पढ़ा उसमें उनको इस तरह से मोटिवेट करते थे कि आप देश के लिए लड़ रहे हो, आपकी आने वाली जो पीढ़ियां हैं वो गुलाम भारत की नहीं होंगी, आजाद भारत की पीढ़ियां होंगी, और आपको दुआएं देंगी, आपको याद रखेंगे कि हमारे पूर्वजों ने हमें आजाद भारत में सांस लेने का मौका दिया। तो ये मोटिवेशन आज की पीढ़ी को इंस्पायर करने के लिए बहुत जरूरत है कि अगर हम अपने देश को विश्व गुरु बनाना चाहते हैं, पीएम मोदी जी का सपना पूरा करना चाहते हैं, और हमारे पूर्वजों का सपना पूरा करना चाहते हैं, सोने की चिड़िया हमारा देश कहा जाता था। आज हमें अगर विश्व गुरु बनना है, सोने की चिड़िया क्या, मैं कहती थी सोने का शेर बनना है हमें भारत को। तो हमारे एक एक देश के बच्चे बच्चे को, हमारे देश पे कुर्बान होने वाले, देश पे अपने प्राण न्यौछावर होने वाले व्यक्तियों के बारे में, शहीदों के बारे में मालूम होना चाहिए। मैं आपको यहाँ ये जरूर बताना चाहूंगी कि मैं जिस फैमिली से बिलोंग करती हूँ, उन्होंने देश की आजादी के लिए लड़ाई लड़ी, फिर देश की एकता और अखंडता के लिए प्राण त्याग दिए, क्योंकि ये मैंने देखा और सहा। मैं अपनी शादी के बाद, इट्स नॉट इजी। अगर आप किसी एम को लेकर चलते हो, देश की एकता अखंडता के लिए प्राण न्यौछावर करते हो, तो आपको बहुत से सेक्रीफाइस करने पड़ते हैं, बहुत सी चुनौतियों का सामना करना पड़ता है, बहुत सी चीजें आपके रास्ते में, बहुत सी अड़चने आती हैं, बहुत सी आपको ऑपोजिशन सहनी पड़ती है, बहुत से नुकसान उठाने पड़ते हैं। हमने अपने दादाजी और पिताजी को खोया, पैटर्नल साइड और मैटरनल साइड। उसके बाद अपने ऑफिस के लोगों को खोया, क्योंकि पंजाब में टेररिज्म था। और उसके बाद जब हमने दिल्ली में अखबार शुरू की, तो यहाँ लोगों को मालूम ही नहीं था कि हमारी फैमिली क्या सह रही है, क्या हो रही है। कहीं कहीं कुछ आर्टिकल लिखे जाते थे तो उनको लगता था कि ये फैमिली, तो मालूम ही नहीं थी हिस्ट्री क्या हो रही है, क्या प्रेजेंट सिचुएशन हो रही है। पंजाब में लोगों को मालूम था, अगर हम दिल्ली आए तो लोग हमारे से बात करना भी नहीं पसंद करते थे कि इनके साथ सिक्योरिटी चल। और मैं अपने बच्चे को स्कूल में एडमिशन नहीं दिला सकी। मैं एक ऐसी माँ थी जो, मैं आंखों में आंसू आते थे कि मैं अपने बच्चे को स्कूल में नहीं भेज सकती, क्योंकि पीक ऑफ टेररिज्म था। चारों तरफ हमें हाउस अरेस्ट था कि बाहर नहीं जाना। मैं और मेरे हस्बैंड अश्विनी जी एक छोटे से घर में, किराए के घर में, यहाँ रह के हमने अखबार शुरू किया था 83 में। जो वो समय हमने बिताया, जिस तरह से हमने टेररिज्म का मुकाबला किया, स्कूल बच्चे को ना भेजकर, और लोग हमारे से दिल्ली में करते थे। जब 84 के बाद कुछ लोगों को यहाँ टेररिज्म का पता चला, अदरवाइज नहीं मालूम था। तो मेरे कहने का भाव है कि हमने तो ये नेताजी सुभाष चंद्र बोस जो हमारे देश के आजादी के मतवाले, उनके सामने ये बहुत छोटी है, हमारी सेक्रीफाइस बहुत छोटी है। पर देश की एकता और अखंडता के रखने के लिए जो हमने सेक्रीफाइस किया, जो हमने सहा, वो समझने और देखने और समझने और सहने में बहुत अंतर है। तो मैं चाहती हूँ कि हमारे देश की जो भी हिस्ट्री है, उसको इस इंटरेस्टिंग तरीके से आने वाली पीढ़ियों को समझाया जाए, बताया जाए, ताकि आजादी की वैल्यू पता चले। लोग जो आज हम सांस ले रहे हैं, आजाद हिंद भारत में, इसके कारण सांस ले रहे हैं। नेताजी सुभाष चंद्र बोस भगत सिंह, आजाद, महात्मा गांधी, इन लोगों के कारण हम सांस ले रहे हैं। तो बच्चे को ये समझ आनी चाहिए कि हमारी हिस्ट्री क्या है और हमने भविष्य में क्या करना है। और ये मैं कहूंगी कि देश का हर व्यक्ति अपनी तरह से एक सिपाही, चाहे वो हाउसवाइफ है, चाहे वो टीचर है, इंजीनियर है, इकोनॉमिस्ट है, हर तरह से वो एक सिपाही है देश के। हर एक की कुछ ना कुछ कंट्रीब्यूशन है देश को विश्व गुरु की तरफ ले जाने के लिए। तो हमें जो अपनी कंट्रीब्यूशन है उसको भी अपने कंट्रीब्यूशन को सार्थक बनाने के लिए, आगे बढ़ने के लिए बहुत जरूरी। जैसे नेताजी सुभाष चंद्र बोस की जीवनी जितनी पढ़ते जाओ, जितनी सुनते जाओ, थोड़े समय के लिए बहुत ज्यादा है, बहुत मतलब कम है। अगर हम उसको समझने की कोशिश करें, हमारे लिए बहुत चीजें उनके लिए कम है। जैसे कि उन्होंने जो रविंद्रनाथ टैगोर ने जनगण मन किया, तो उन्होंने उसका हिंदी अनुवाद किया था, सब सुख चैन, बहुत ही कहते पॉपुलर हुआ था उस समय। तो उनमें एक हिंदुज्म भी था, पर धर्मनिरपेक्षता बहुत थी। वो सब धर्मों का आदर करते थे। यही कारण था कि जो उनकी फौज थी उसका जो मेजर था वो एक मुस्लिम भी था। तो वो सबको लेकर साथ बढ़कर आगे बढ़ते थे। शायद उन्हीं की ये ताकत थी, तो सबको साथ लेकर आगे बढ़ रहे थे। आज हम आजाद हिंद भारत में हैं, आजाद हिंद भारत में सांस ले रहे हैं और आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। और आज मुझे इस प्रोग्राम में हिस्सा लेकर बहुत अच्छा लगा। पर ब्रिगेडियर चिकारा जी, मैं आपको एक रिक्वेस्ट करती हूँ, जो कैप आपने सबको पहनाई है, मेरी कैप जरूर संभाल के रखिए। मैं आपसे लेने आऊंगी जब थोड़ा सा ये कोरोना का संकट दूर हो जाएगा, क्योंकि कोरोना है और हम कोरोना से भी फाइट कर रहे हैं। हमें कहाँ कहाँ फाइट करनी पड़ रही है आजकल। तो मुझे आज इस फंक्शन पे आने पर, चाहे जूम पे हूँ, मुझे सबका वक्तव्य सुनकर और आप सबके बीच में रहकर बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है। और मैं अपने आप को बहुत भाग्यशाली समझ रही हूँ कि आप जैसे लोगों के बीच में आकर मुझे भी कुछ कहने का मौका मिला। नमस्कार, जय हिंद, जय भारत।
थैंक यू किरण जी, आपने बहुत प्रोत्साहित किया हम सभी को। और जिस तरह आपने कहा नेताजी के बारे में, we were so thrilled to hear it. And let me tell everybody here in this audience today, all those who are here, so that you know the message can reach, that क्या थी कल्पना इस नए भारत की नेताजी की, क्या था वो जुनून जिसने ब्रिटिश को यहाँ से जाने पे मजबूर किया. And for all those who do not know, Lord Clement Attlee has written, and we have a written declaration. Yes, Professor Kapil Kumar, am I right? He has written on the declaration on leaving India that we leave India because of this one man, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. All right. I stand corrected. He said that later on. But we owe the freedom to Netaji's efforts. Absolutely. And we must also recognize, Kiranji, you mentioned about the tradition in the army. Let me please tell you that in the army, the tradition of, religious place, all religious places in the same venue is being maintained even today. And even today, a soldier greets another one by saying Jai Hind. So Jai Hind to all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, Shri Ajit Doval, a National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of the Republic of India, was to address us today, but unfortunately, he's busy with a commitment with the Prime Minister, with the Honorable Prime Minister, and he's unable to join us today. But as our chief guest, let me please tell you a little bit about him. He's the 5th and current National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of India. He was the youngest police officer to receive the Police Medal for Meritorious Service. He was granted one of the highest gallantry awards, the Kirti Chakra, and he has been associated with the INA Trust for a very, very long time. In fact, since its inception. Thank you, sir. You've always been a stellar figure, and we all feel very encouraged and motivated by your presence always. We thank you for your support. On behalf of Brigadier Chikara, I thank you from all members of the INA. I now request Srimati Anita Bose ji, who's here on a virtual mode with us, Are we able to establish the contact? She was there in the beginning. Namaste, Anita ji. We're so privileged. Please share your thoughts today.
Namaste. Distinguished members of the panel, especially, of course, members of the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose INA Trust and of FICCI. I'm very grateful that this cooperation between the trust and between FICCI has continued for many years. And I think in today's keynote address, we had a very befitting topic covering both interests of the historical concern of the trust with the parties, with the independence movement, especially with the INA independence movement, and of the economic aspects involved in today's modern life, for which FICCI, of course, stands in a very specific way, being one of the important players in this field. Let me express my personal appreciation also of the topic, because I'm an economist myself, and particularly the topic that Dr. Subramanian touched upon and discussed, that is India's traditional values in economic activity, upholding economic activity, but combining it with ethics, the dharma, is also very close to my heart. I'm an economist myself, and I have worked in the field of social policy for many decades until my retirement. And of course, my interest in that topic remains. And social policy, viewed from a viewpoint of economics, particularly, is very much this combination between dharma and artha. And I think in many ways we have experienced this also in more modern times. But I felt it very gratifying to see that India has upheld these values in the very past, and maybe also indirectly influenced later economic thinking. Although I doubt that Adam Smith, who was a moral theologist, developing into an economist, was aware of the Indian roots of this activity. Now, if we turn to Netaji, of course, in one way, we can also appreciate that this topic was close to him, because he was one of the, in the 1930s, one of the young modern freedom fighters. Together with Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, they were both interested in industrialization, in modernization of the economy. And of course, maybe one might say Netaji a bit more in the dharma side of it, because he emphasized also the underutilized resources of India, the downtrodden, the working class, and on the one hand, and the women on the other. And of course, we also know that both he and also Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru were very interested in a social planning approach to economics, which you might say is more of a socialist or social democratic kind of approach to the topic, which differs in some ways. But we can only speculate what might have been if Netaji had been around and had exercised influence on India's development. And I would imagine that given his outlook, his experience, his reading, that he probably would have turned away from the strict form of planning that was exercised in India during the first few decades, and would have advocated a liberalization, which eventually took place in India starting 1991, earlier. Of course, that's speculation. I think we can experience that going to one extreme, only to artha or only to dharma, or of course, in a somewhat maybe sometimes not so efficient way of advocating dharma, that is by public administration, that the marriage between the two, which Dr. Subramanian pointed out was the essence of the ancient Indian approach, gets lost a bit if we have only emphasize on free markets without ethics, or only on ethics without looking to efficiency. Neither will be very successful. So it is the combination of the two that need to be done. In fact, in the country where I've been living for the last few decades, this concept of the, you might say, dharma and artha has a name which is called the social market economy. The idea enabling the economy to work efficiently, but at the same time put in fences against the extreme exploitation of one group to the other. And those of you who have had anything to do with economic theory also know that markets, according to economic theory, will work perfectly if they are perfect. But of course, there are no perfect markets, and particularly in some fields of the economy, that is not feasible. And therefore, in order to sort of get a second best solution in economic terms, you have to have certain guidelines which hem in extreme development in ignoring efficiency or in ignoring justice and concern for the downtrodden. So I'm very glad that Dr. Subramanian pointed out this concept of the two as a very traditional Indian concept, and I hope that India will embrace this in a modern setting to the benefit of the Indian population. Of course, there are maybe some aspects which could not be envisaged not in the the time 1500 or 2000 years ago, and also not even in the 1930s when the Indian independence movement was struggling to, first of all, gain political independence, but for many of them also with a thought of how the country would then operate. We have not envisaged that information, I think, is going to cause a revolution in our societies and our economy, which might endanger some of the benefits of economic progress and of political emancipation. And we can only hope that India will play an important role in finding a good compromise with these between these two aspects of dharma and artha in a context of a changing environment, because that will not be easier. But I have all the hope that India will be able to do that. Now, let me say a couple of things about a totally different aspect, that is the role of the INA. I think the members of the INA were not the only freedom fighters, of course, but I must say I've always been very disappointed that it took such a long time for the INA to be recognized as freedom fighters, just as important as the nonviolent freedom fighters. And I think it took a long time. I think it was under the rule of Indira Gandhi as Prime Minister in the 70s that at last the INA members were recognized as freedom fighters, which was both a matter of recognition in terms of respect and grateful recognition. Indian Army, which, if anything, had worked to help suppress India, continued as the new Indian Army. Well, that may have had its good reasons or not so good reasons. I think it was a great disappointment for these men and women who have valiantly fought for India. And I'm very glad that the Netaji and INA Trust upholds the role of these people also. And I must say, I'm also grateful that the present government has recognized the contribution of the INA members in a more symbolic way, which I'm certainly, which I'm sure that certainly is gratifying for those who are still alive. Thank you for inviting me to this interesting meeting today, and I hope that we can all look forward to a successful development of India in the dharma of the freedom fighters and the efficiency, hopefully, of a traditionally efficient Indian business community and economy. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, and thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. We're very, very grateful for your support and indebted to you indeed. And let me please tell you, ma'am, that there was a program to the run-up of the 125th anniversary at Kolkata, where the Honorable Prime Minister was there. And the INA warriors were awarded and applauded for their efforts. I was there that time in Kolkata.
Yes.
So and the trust is carrying on the legacy. And also to add to what you said, I'd like to add that the world is now looking towards India for things like haldi, neem, turmeric, all these things. So India's economy has to go up. Everybody is looking towards India, and Bharat jeetega, Corona bhi harega. And we will value the time that you have given us. We also implore you to join us on more such occasions. Thank you so much, ma'am. Delighted. And please listen to Netaji's favorite song. I'd like the technical team to align that, please. कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की, तो कौम पे लुटाए जा.
Whether we individually live to see India free or not, we are confident that India shall be free.
कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की, तो कौम पे लुटाए जा. कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की, तो कौम पे लुटाए जा. तू शेर हिंद आगे बढ़, मरने से तू कभी न डर, उड़ा के दुश्मनों का सर जो शेवतन बढ़ाए जा. तू शेर हिंद आगे बढ़, मरने से तू कभी न डर, उड़ा के दुश्मनों का सर जो शेवतन बढ़ाए जा. कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की, तो कौम पे लुटाए जा.
And after that absolutely enthralling song, which is the INA song, I now request our chairman, Brigadier R.S. Chikaraji, and Mr. Dilip Shenoy to felicitate our keynote speaker today and give him a token of our appreciation. Thank you so much, sir. I now take this opportunity to present the vote of thanks today. On behalf of our chairman, Brigadier R.S. Chikara, I'd like to thank our chief guest and chair, Shri Ajit Doval, our keynote speaker, Mr. Subramanian, for taking out time from his busy schedule and sharing his thoughts with us today, even in pandemic times. मैं उम्मीद करती हूँ कि नेताजी ट्रस्ट का आने वाला कल रोशन हो. And in the end, I'd like to add, after 74 years of our independence, and in spite of considerable progress in several fields, our nation once again confronts difficult and turbulent times. Terrorism from across our borders, caste and religious divides in society, a self-serving polity, corruption, lopsided socio-economic movements, and a crisis of values and identity are some of the symptoms of serious malaise, which, if not treated in time, can threaten the fabric of our society and indeed the very integrity of our great country. It is time, ladies and gentlemen, we took a page from Netaji's life. And to add to all this, we have the Wuhan virus adding to our further pain. Let us today salute the great leader once again. Jai Hind and Namaskar to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I request you all to please join us for refreshment. Thank you, Mitro, and thank you, DD News. Thank you, Punjab Kesari. Please join us for refreshment. Thank you. Jai Hind.